those 4 groups, I should say, people from them, to come to Andrews, and we'll have a little meeting. Well, then began the debate. Who will chair this august group? Well, again, I'm so naive, I'm thinking, well, obviously the GC archivist. The White Estate's a GC institution, Andrews is a GC institution, Lowland is a GC institution, so why not the GC archivist? That made sense to me. It did not make sense to the then director of the Andrews Library. She let me know in no uncertain terms that she remembered when Don Yost, he was the archivist then, when Don Yost wore knee pants around the Tacoma Park, and she wasn't about to let him tell her how to do anything. So I said, oh, okay, well, whatever you say. So much for this friendly little conversation that I was hoping that we would have. Well, eventually Dr. Schwartz, who I think was Vice President for Academic Affairs at that point, or maybe he was still in the History Department, I don't remember. Anyway, he was asked to chair it, and even the library director at Andrews let it be known that she would attend, but she would say nothing. I remember in her office, I looked at her and I said, you won't say a word the whole day? Now, she liked to talk, so it didn't seem too likely to me, but I said, you don't plan on saying a word? No, I will not say, I'll go, because you want me to talk. I said, you mean in the morning when I walk in and I say to you, good morning, Mrs. Mitchell, you're not going to say good morning? Well, she broke into a smile, and that broke the ice, and she did speak. I knew she would. Anyway, so I thought, well, we're doing pretty well now. We got everybody here, and one time in one room talking about Adventist resources. And the meeting, I thought, went pretty well. The next, when we had it, I thought it went quite well. And the day afterwards, I went to see Louise Detterin, who was in charge of the Heritage Room. She was bubbling all over. She thought it went well. And then I went over to the seminary library to where the lady that was in charge of the vault was, the White Estate vault. And she let me know in no uncertain terms that I was disloyal to the White Estate, that I had not stuck up for her opinions the day before, and it was very obvious that I was on the side of the universities, and on and on and on she went. And I thought, oh my word. After all this work, and we had this meeting, and I thought it went well to have this, and she wouldn't stop. So finally I just said, really, you were there because people wanted you there. And you've got a problem. I don't know what your problem is, but you've got a problem. And you need to get over it because, And I knew that she was a good friend of Arthur White's, and I figured that was the end of my work at the White Estate. But it still needed to be said. So, but then I did feel a little sorry, and I went down to, is it Casperson? Does he still have a bookstore in Niles?
Yeah.
There. Wow. Anyway, I went down there, and I think that's where I went. Somewhere I went to Niles. And I found a book she didn't have in her collection. I took it to her as a peace prize, a peace offering, and it helped a little bit. But I still thought I was in pretty deep water there. But I went from Andrews, then I went to the White Estate, and Bob Olson had just become director of the White Estate just a short time before that. Arthur White, who had been director for 41 years, retired, so he could write the 6-volume biography of Ellen White. And when I walked in, I knew I was in deep trouble, because he said, what's happened over there at Andrews? Oh, boy, he's had a phone call. So I told him about the meeting and how I thought it was advantageous and helpful, and I told him about this little conversation that I'd had with the director of the White Estate office. And I remember, I'm the director of the center out at Lone Linda, but I'm just a kid. I was like 32 or something. I'm not quite in the same category as all these other people. So when I told him what I finally said to her, I knew that was going to be, thank you, we've enjoyed your services, but you can pick up your paycheck down the hall, He said, you said that to her? I said, yes, I did. I'm sorry, I did. And he said, I wanted to say that to her for years. I'm glad you did. So at least I was still hired for a little while longer. Well, then some other things came along. My whole life has been kind of revolved around preserving Adventist history, Ellen White materials, etc. So, as was mentioned in that nice short little thing that I didn't write, by the way. I know some people like to write their introductions, but I didn't write that one. I have been involved with Adventist Historic Properties, and I wrote the proposal for the village in 1980 and was one of the co-founders in 1981. And again, I did a few things along the way that probably I shouldn't have done, but just to give you a little bit more background as to my kind of unusual personality, I guess. When they wanted to form Adventist Heritage Ministry, which again is all part of my history thing, you see, Adventist history. It's maybe a little bigger than what you have on your shelves when it comes to talk about houses, but anyway, it's still part of our history. I thought we should incorporate so we could hold property anywhere in the United States. And nobody else agreed with me. And the attorney from the Michigan Conference called me and said, you know, there's nobody on that board that agrees with you. I said, yeah, I know that. But it's still the right thing to do. What would you do? He said, well, I do like you. I would write the wording so you can hold property anywhere in the United States, not just the state of Michigan. I said, does it cost any more to write it one way? No, he said, but it'll cost you, of course, if you want to go back and change it later on. I said, that's what I figured. So I said, do me a favor. Just bring along the page the way I want it with my wording. I'm a team player. If they vote me down, fine, I'll be happy. We've got an organization. But he did me one better. He put the page in with my wording instead of the other wording. And they voted it. And it was a good thing we did, because 3 years later, we bought the William Miller Farm. And at least in my atlas, the William Miller Farm, New York State, is not part of Michigan. So I was kind of glad that we had written it the other way. Let's see, 1981, ASDAL was organized at Pacific Union College. And I gave a talk there on promoting the SDA Periodical Index. And I was nominated to be the vice president of the newly organized ASDAL. But I wasn't elected. So I guess that the librarians realized then that I probably wasn't trustworthy. And so I never have had an office at ASDAL. And, but it's all right, I still love you guys. And anyway, there was a panel discussion on cataloging Adventist materials. Keith Loudon led out in that. And I wasn't part of that discussion, though, because my life has been collecting this stuff and let you guys catalog it and get it all sorted out and organized and all that. But, let's see, we did have, we had a Vespers. And I don't know if anybody was at that Vespers Friday night at that first organization. We went down to Elmshaven. And Ellen White's granddaughter, Grace Jacques, had Friday evening Vespers for us and told us stories about her grandmother there in the home that Grace had grown up in. At least for me, it was a very, very special thing. Well, then in 1982, May of 82, there were a few more organizations collecting Adventist books by then and Adventist materials, and so again I organized a half-day conference on preserving Adventist materials at Andrews University. And because I'd learned before, don't get the wrong person to chair it, we asked Dr. Schwartz, if he would chair it again. I'm a slow learner, but once I learned, I realized that some things, that's the GC archivist to do. And Gary Shear, anybody know where Gary Shear is these days?
Missouri.
Is he in Missouri? He and I roomed together for that May of 82 meeting, and he spluttered the whole time. He's not here to defend himself. That was the first time in his marriage that he had to spend the night with his wife, and it was really a major trauma for him. It seemed like, at least to me, listening to him. Ben, would you quit your recording, please, back there? I know that guy. He works right across the hall. We have a lot of fun together, but you have to watch him because you don't know what he's up to next. Then the first annual conference of ASDAL in 82, there was no separate meeting for Adventist materials. However, there was a tour of the White Estate on Friday evening led by Norman Collins and myself, even though the printed program, your program says Ron Grable, but that's not, he didn't do it. Norman Collins and I led the tour. And the archives was led by, tour was led by Don Yost. Oh yeah, I might as well tell you about this one. This was where the PUC people, I don't know anybody anymore. Anybody here from Pacific College? Oh, right over there. Okay, all right. Well, you have a study center because, again, I didn't know to keep my mouth shut. In 1982, they had been working on remodeling Elmshaven, and if you go to Elmshaven, though it needs a little touch-up painting occasionally, but basically the remodeling, the restoration, renovation was back 80, 81, 82. And Arthur White had left Tacoma Park and had moved out to the old Swindle place. That was his mother-in-law's place not far from Elmshaven home, and that's where he and his wife had retired, and he was working on the biography, the 6 volumes of the Ellen White biography, and he wanted material sent out there for an Ellen White study center, not a full research center, but a study center. And so He had convinced the White Estate, it wasn't too hard, I mean, he'd been their boss for 41 years, so he convinced the White Estate to ship everything out there, and they were going to set up an Ellen White Study Center at Elmshaven. And when I arrived for the meeting, I was on the Elmshaven Restoration Committee, Preservation, whatever it was called, and the caretakers there at the time were spluttering. We don't know anything about a study center. We don't want a study center here. It takes all the work we have to visit, to host our visitors and keep up the grounds. And so Taylor Rule was then the director of the PUC library. So I went up to PUC and I said, do you have any interest in a study center here in the PUC library? And he said, oh yes, we'd love to have one. I said, well, let's see what we can do. So we made an appointment with Elder White. He was going to meet us down at Elmshaven, and Taylor and I went down to talk to him about this study center that was going to, chances are nobody else would be doing it for us. Now, admittedly, in the last few years, there's been a bit more interest in millenarianism, etc. But still, basically, it's we Adventist librarians that are preserving the story of God's leading in the history of our church. And so I want to affirm all of you that have active programs. If you don't have an active program, I'd like to nudge you to get one at your institution, because we certainly need this. And I'll tell you why. A couple of years ago, 3 years ago I guess it was now, well, I'll back up. Back when Neil Wilson Sr. was president of the General Conference, and I was working out in Loma Linda, one time I said to him, you know, something I think your leaders of the church, the leaders of our church would really enjoy is the New England tour. Oh yeah, Jim, that's a good idea. That was it. So along came Elder Falkenberg, and I got my nerve up to say to him one time, you know, something I think that would really be a blessing and that the leaders of the church would enjoy is the New England tour. Great idea, Jim. That was the end of that. So then, I don't give up too easily. So then Elder Paulson's president. So I'm visiting with him one time, and I said, you know, something I really think the leaders of this church would get a blessing from and would enjoy is a New England tour. Yeah, Jim, that's a good idea. That was the end of that. Never heard anything more about it. So when Ted Wilson came along, I had to go, you know, all the heads of departments and stuff, I had to go visit with him shortly after the session. So while I was visiting with him, I said, you know, something I really think, no, I don't even know why I'm telling you this. I said, I told your dad and nothing happened. I told Elder Falkenberg nothing happened. I told Elder Paulson nothing happened. I'm not sure why I'm going to even tell you, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I think something that would really be a blessing to the leaders of the church is a New England tour. And I about fell off my seat when he said, let's make it happen. And sure enough, we did make it happen a few months later. And the reason I'm saying it is important that we preserve the history of our church, make certain you've got your recording off now, is because the leaders of this church know almost nothing about the history of the church. It was amazing to me that I was going to say presidents and divisions. Well, you didn't hear me say that, but presidents and divisions and secretaries and treasurers and officers of the General Conference had no idea. Merlin was on the tour. He was one of the tour guides. We had 3 buses. And you remember there was an awful lot of just plain, I was going to say ignorance. You can't say the other are ignorant. But anyway, lack of understanding about the history of our church. It is important that the leaders of this church, as well as the members, know why we're here, where we came from, and what we're all about. And if we don't preserve the information, they're going to just kind of go on through, drifting through life, enjoying your life, but they won't know a thing about what God really has in mind for this church. And the incredible story of the pioneers of this church. Now, before I close, I want to make one thing abundantly clear. Even though I've been kind of telling you about my stuff that I've been doing through the years, there is no way that any one person even came up with all these ideas, let alone did all the work. And I have been privileged to work with a number of associates through the years, another number of colleagues from other institutions who have helped with some of these dreams, have suggested on adding to these dreams. Through the years, it's been a real blessing and a privilege. And it's already been mentioned that you guys are going to be talking about the Adventist Digital Library. Let me tell you, when you think about the periodical index and you think about how when we, as in those days I was part of, and was managing editor for a while, when we came together, what a difference we made for this church and access to the publications of this church. Even though there are different people now, they'll be talking about ADL and different people that will be encouraging us all to participate. From this old dinosaur from the ages past, let me just say, we have a chance to make another great difference in the life of the church. And if you don't know about the project, I think you'll be excited when the presentations are made either later today or tomorrow. Again, those of you that have been part of my life through the years, thank you very much for enriching my life. For those of you that I don't yet know, someday I hope I will. And for Larry, that scoundrel, you know what you said to me? I want to say something to you before you say anything. You know what you said to me back there when I was elected, not elected vice president. You don't even remember. What it hurt me terribly. My psyche has been damaged the rest of my life. You said, what happened to you? Why didn't you get elected?
But I voted for you. That's why you didn't get elected. I'd like to make a correction on your collection.
Oh.
Now, I personally know you collect Native American material, coins, stamps. Is there a microphone?
Yeah. Hit the button. Pull the mic.
Okay, I personally know that you collect Native American, turkey feathers on some kinds of dolls or something, coins, stamps, presidential signatures, postcards, scrimshaw 4-edge paintings. What have I left out? Oh, Victorian furniture for your home. But what else might we say there?
I'm an accumulator.
Well, there's been books called, there was a book a number of years ago called The Collector, which was not a good thing, but I view Jim as a collector. That's all he should have on his card, a collector.
Well, for some reason, they put some other things on the cards. It's been a lot of fun through the years. It has been. Yeah. And by the way, one of the things, I see my time isn't quite up, one of the things that the YSA is working on right now is something that I've dreamt about for years, and that is a new Ellen White Visitor Center. And if it all goes as planned, it will be open here at the General Conference for spring meeting next April. And why do you collect some of this stuff? So I can sit in my basement and once every 3 or 4 years I have a few friends over and show them some of my rare Adventist stuff. No, a bunch of the stuff's going to be donated, or this is going to be put on display in the new visitor center. So I'm kind of excited about finally. I just wish we had an Adventist museum. Don't get me started on wishes, what I think we still need to do.
No, please.
How many of you are good Mormons? You've been to Salt Lake City. Well, at least you've been to the genealogy library out there, and on Temple Square. Have any of you walked, if you go west out of Temple Square, and you go on the west gate, and you go to the southwest, you go to the genealogy library. Have any of you been to the same gate out of Temple Square, but to the northwest, to the Church History Museum? The Mormons there have a museum that, when it was built 20 or so years ago, would have rivaled the Smithsonian. I don't think they've kept it up, and at least not last time I was there a couple of 3 years ago. They could have updated it a little bit. But, it is a first class. And I remember the first time I went through that museum, actually the first time after I got remarried. Some of you may know I'm divorced and remarried. Happily remarried, by the way. The divorce was with the first one. Anyway, I took my new wife there because I wanted to see her. I wanted her to see one of my dreams. Somewhere, someday, this church would have a thing like this. When you first go into that museum, the first entry, after you enter into the main doors, is a bas-relief of Joseph Smith. And there, I don't remember now, I don't know my Mormon theology very well. I don't know it at all, actually. But there's God and Moroni or somebody. Anyway, there's two beings there with Joseph Smith, calling him to be the prophet of the church. And I can remember as vividly as if it was yesterday, here was a father with a little 4 or 5-year-old son in tow. And all I heard, because I kept walking, I didn't stop, was, here is where God called the prophet. And I turned to Mindy and I said, where in my church can I take my young person with that kind of experience? Child, grandchild. We have none. Some of the historic sites that I've had the privilege of working with are as close as they come. After Ted Wilson became president of the General Conference, I was talking to him about this and saying, someday I had this dream, and I haven't had another call back on that, just the two of us. But anyway, I had this dream about having a first-class museum on Adventist history somewhere. And he said, well, let's have the head of communication, the head of communication, Williams Costa, meet you in Salt Lake City, and you take him there. So we did. And if I had paid money, I could not have had happen what happened. We walked into the museum, and here was a father with his little child standing in front of that bas-relief. I have no idea this time what was said, because I didn't stop and I didn't hear anything, except from Williams afterwards. He said, it really happens, doesn't it? Yes, it does. It really happens. And we need something like that in our church. That's just one of the things. But my time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I can attest to the spiritual value of those New England study tours. My wife and I had the privilege of going to Maryland this past May, and Jim met us for a day and part of another time. It's a tremendous experience. If you ever have a chance to go on a New England study tour, a church history study tour, jump at it. Unfortunately, they don't do enough of them. I know you have other things to do with your life, but that's a good one. Jim, would you mind coming back up here for a moment? Appreciate coming back, whether you want to or not. On behalf of ASDAL and the Adventist Resources section, I'd like to present you with a plaque, which is a small token of our appreciation for your leadership and vision in developing the emphasis on Adventist resources through the years. And I'd like to read this plaque before I let you have it. It's well padded so it can be safe, but it has the ASDAL logo on it. Adventist Resources section presented to James R. Nix in appreciation and thanks for his work in initiating ARS and his work on behalf of Adventist Resources. It has today's date, 2014 ASDAL Conference, Silver Spring, Maryland.
I noticed he scratched out the line under my name that said, almost president of ASDAL.
Yeah, well, I got advance word on that.
Thank you very much.
No, Jim, they want a picture.
Two Jims.
So you're supposed to present it? Are we setting
Turn
this
it
up?
around so I turn around so I will show it a picture. Yeah, that looks